And so the first item will be the Pledge of Allegiance. So I don't have a flag or anything, but I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And so next up, item number 2 is the welcome and the introductions. So are we going to do that, or do we all know each other? Beth?
I would raise my hand on that, and Annette, because this is a public meeting and it is being recorded, I believe that you should introduce all of us, and whether we're a planning commission member or staff, so that the viewing public knows who is on the call.
Okay.
Or in the meeting.
Okay, sounds good. So you want me to introduce everybody? Okay. So first on my screen is Josie, and she is a city employee. And then myself, Annette Stewart, I'm a planning commissioner. And then next up is Beck Ashby, and she is a planning commissioner. And then I have Jim Fisk. He is a city employee in the planning department, along with Josie. She's in the planning department. Tyler McCloskey, he is a planning commissioner. Dave Bernstein, he also is a planning commissioner. Joe Morrison, a planning commissioner. And Stephanie Bailey, she also is a planning commissioner. So next on the agenda is item number 3, audience comments. And I don't see any audience. Is that correct? No,
yeah, there's nobody in the audience tonight.
Okay, so we won't have any items that aren't on the agenda then. Next up, item number 4, approval of the minutes from April 5th, 2022. And the minutes from the previous meeting have been distributed. And are there any corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, the minutes are approved as distributed.
We don't need a motion for that?
No. Unless there were, and because there was no corrections.
I'm used to always having any action item actually with the motion and approval. I would move to approve the minutes as presented.
I will second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, and the meetings have been, or the minutes from the April 5th, 2022 meeting have been approved. So business item number 5 is public hearing 2022 comprehensive plan amendment. In compliance with POMC 20-04-070, the Planning Commission is provided a recommendation by a resolution to the City Council prior to June 30th, 2022 regarding the proposed comprehensive plan amendments. The city initiated 3 amendments to the comprehensive plan for the 2022 comprehensive plan amendment process. Letter I is a park plan element. And do we want to go over these individually though? Once I open up the public hearing? Or I mean, do you want to, actually, before I open it, do you want to go over it individually? Josie?
I would recommend that staff review the information and then open the public hearing.
That's what I'm asking. That's how we usually do it, but I'm not sure who was. Josie, are you going to be, oh, Jim?
Oh, yeah, Jim.
Yeah,
Sorry, okay.
I'll do it. I was just waiting for you to open it up, but I think all of you are familiar with this process. The city initiated 3 text amendments to adopt the parks element. You have all seen the pros plan that was adopted earlier this year by the city council. That's to be incorporated into the comprehensive plan. There's also some minor housekeeping issues as far as grammar and things like that, part of the parks element. Transportation improvement program, we update this annually to move projects from the 20 and 6-year tip to be programmed for design and construction, those sorts of things. 6-year being in the near term and 20 with a longer time horizon. You can note in the tip that was provided to you that it's color coded. The green indicates that it is a new project. Yellow indicates that there are changes to it, you know, as far as budgeting, that sort of thing. Sometimes the scope of those projects may change, but typically they don't change significantly. And then the red denotes projects that are deleted from the other. So yeah, you've all seen that. We typically move those around to leverage funding, that sort of thing, with the priorities established by the city council. And then there's an update to the capital facilities element, which is adopting the amendment to the water system plan to be in compliance with state requirements. So you've all seen these things before. This was introduced earlier this year, and then the council adopted the docket at the last planning commission meeting. You set tonight to be the hearing date. There really hasn't been any change to what was presented at the April planning commission. So tonight we're looking for the planning commission to provide a recommendation to the city council on whether or not to adopt these proposed amendments. And we intend to take this to work study, ultimately to the city council, and hopefully have this adopted in the middle of June at the first city council meeting.
Okay, so at this time, I'm going to open up the public hearing, 2022 comprehensive plan amendments. And still seeing no audience members. I will close the public hearing on the 2022 comprehensive plan amendments. So is there any discussion on it now? So seeing nobody has anything. Does somebody want to make a motion?
I would I move to the city council the 2022 comprehensive plan amendments as presented for the council's consideration.
I'll go ahead and second that.
All right. So
As
it's
the maker of the motion, I have a comment, and I have a question. I asked it at our last meeting, and Jim, I'm going to ask it again. The TIP, the transportation improvement schedule that's been given to us, has that been vetted at all by the transportation committee?
Yes, the last transportation committee meeting was it the last Tuesday, I want to say, it was discussed, and they offered no objection.
okay. So it's been moved and seconded that the city, that we move it to the city council, the 2022 comp plan amendments as presented for the council's consideration. Is there any further debate on this? Okay, so those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Can you
Aye.
raise your hands? I want to make sure. 1, 2, 3. Stephanie, are you saying aye?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so fine. And those opposed say no. So the ayes have it. So now it'll move on to the city council for consideration. So next up is the POMC 20.162.044 definition revision. The city is considering amendments to the Port Orchard Municipal Code 20.162.044 to amend the definition of wetland isolated. The purpose of the amendment is to provide a definition which is consistent with current Washington Department of Ecology guidance.
Good evening, Jim Fisk, Senior Planner, City of Port Orchard. At the end of your very large packet, the last page, you will find a proposed definition for an isolated wetland. The strike through is the currently existing language, and then what you see in red there is the proposed language. Currently, our definition for an isolated wetland actually requires the United States Army Corps of Engineers to make a determination if a wetland is isolated, not necessarily that they would take jurisdiction over the wetland or that it's even a federally regulated wetland. Rather, they would actually have to make the determination if it is isolated from other features. And this is slightly problematic because the Army Corps of Engineers, they must have a lot of work to do. So sometimes getting that decision out of them can kind of hold things up. When our critical areas ordinance was adopted in 2016, the current definition is the guidance that the Department of Ecology gave us. And that is why we adopted it that way. But since then, DOE has kind of backtracked on that definition and realized that it may be a bit onerous. And so this is an attempt to kind of get in line with what DOE really intends. And so we've worked with our consultant and some local stakeholders in drafting this definition. We believe that it allows for the science to determine if a wetland is isolated through the required study, but it also takes out the Army Corps of Engineers from making a determination if it is isolated or not. Again, if it's a federally regulated wetland, this definition does not remove any obligation from an applicant from having to coordinate with the Corps of Engineers. So tonight we're looking for, well, we're hoping that the Planning Commission will schedule a public hearing on this definition at the next Planning Commission meeting, which is, I believe, is June 7th. And so I'm happy to answer any questions about this. If you want a little backstory, I can provide that as well. But yeah, this definition is more in line with what DOE is after.
Thanks, Jim. Is there do you have any questions about this? Anybody?
Well, I have my hand raised. Jim, why does this rise to the level of a public hearing?
It's a code amendment, and so that's really the process we need to go through to amend the code.
Okay,
Ultimately,
thank you. And do we have many of these isolated wetlands within the city limits?
I don't have an account of them, if that's what you're after, but I know of 2 in the last 6 months that we've had to deal with. The way the code currently reads is that if there is an isolated wetland, and I want to say it's under 1,000 square feet, that wetland, and it's category 4, I should say that as well, that it can be filled. But the determination of whether or not it's isolated would actually come from the Army Corps of Engineers. So we can go through our whole process of reviewing permits, have our consultant look at the wetland reports, and everybody, including the Department of Ecology, can agree that this wetland may be filled. The fact that our definition says it's isolated and puts that burden on the Corps of Engineers to make that determination holds things up. So I know of 2 that are currently in permitting that are dealing with this issue.
Isn't there a wetland out there by Seabed Pizza? Is that?
There's a lot of critical areas out there.
Okay.
Blackjack Creek is there, and there's quite a bit going on in that area.
I just remember when they were going in years ago, they traded land somehow to mitigate that.
Yeah, there's a process in our code that you can do things like that and mitigate impacts to wetlands. These particular ones that this really addresses are fairly small in size. In discussing it with our consultant, one of them in particular, he doesn't see an environmental benefit to even keeping it, just because it's such a low scoring wetland.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I suppose, Jim, then that the purpose, the end goal of this definition change is really to make development on wetlands easier to permit and process?
I wouldn't say that. The reality is that the Army Corps of Engineers doesn't want to have to make these determinations all the time. That's really what it boils down to.
Yeah.
So this is just trying to come more in line with DOE. I understand what they were trying to do at the beginning of this when we adopted it, but I think many jurisdictions in the region have kind of gotten away from that definition. It's not intended to make development any easier or anything like that. It's just a more expeditious way of doing it.
Sure. And so your new, I mean, we can get into this next month, right? But your new proposed definition you feel is more in line with ecology and offers you more flexibility in order to determine wetland status and how to deal with it. Is that safe to say?
It's not the categorization or the scoring or anything like that. It's just solely, is it isolated or not?
Okay.
And that's it.
And if it's isolated, it's a wetland.
If it's, well, it could be a wetland either way. If it's
Okay.
isolated, it just means that it's not attached to any other water course or anything like that, or part of a network of wetlands. This just takes the
If I
core
could-
out of that determination.
Yeah, if I could interject, what I'm hearing is a small isolated wetland may be able to be filled. Now, if it were not isolated and were connected to other water systems, that may be more problematic. And what I believe they're trying to do is come up with a definition that doesn't engage the Corps of Army Engineers on the front side of this. If it becomes a federal issue, and I'm assuming if there's federal funding involved, then the Army Corps of Engineers would have to be engaged. Is that kind of a summary, Jim?
That's about right. It's just a matter of, is it isolated or not?
Okay.
I remember years ago, and Annette and Stephanie, I don't know if you're on the Planning Commission at the time, but a small development wanted to go in, and the city was referring to things as a wetland, and the neighbors were referring it to the swamp in their backyard, and they were very anxious to get it filled. And I think that's the kind of thing we're talking about here.
It
That's
could be,
helpful. Thank you. That's helpful.
yeah, and it could be, but I don't want to mislead you or anything. Any development activity permit that comes in, if there's a wetland near it or on the land, we're going to review a wetland report and make sure that any development near that wetland is consistent with the code. Typically that involves a buffer, and those wetlands are maintained in perpetuity.
Dave, I see your hand is up.
Yep. Jim, maybe you said it at the beginning, but I may have just not caught it trying to catch up on things. Where did you come up with the definition that's in red?
So this was, we created this with our consultant, Grady Associates. Actually, Nick reached out to DOE, touched base with them about their guidance, and that's where we determined that, you know, DOE is getting away from this definition that we have. I worked with the consultant and came up with some language. We looked at several jurisdictions, and we ultimately fell on this definition. Although our consultant did add in that kind of language at the end, that kind of disclaimer language that you may have to coordinate with the Army Corps of Engineers, that sort of thing. We also vetted this with some local stakeholders, and they seem to think that this definition is workable as well. And by stakeholders, I don't mean developers, wetland mitigation, banking, those guys.
So I just did a quick Google search on isolated wetlands, and obviously it's a significant topic because I got quite a few hits and a lot of different definitions. All sound kind of similar, but I'm not an expert in wetlands by any means, so they may all sound similar to me, but have significant differences. So where this came from and what each piece means sounds to me, from looking at some of these terms and definitions on the internet, looks like you have to be fairly careful about the wording.
Yeah, you do. This specifically, this language, in talking with our consultant, comes from the DOE manual. It's called the Synthesis of Science. So if you Google Washington Department of Ecology Synthesis of Science, this is going to be buried down in there, I think on like page 74, 75. In fact, I can pull it up if, let me find it. And I can show it to you.
And not being an expert by any means, are there truly isolated wetlands? Aren't they all connected to the water table and the water in the atmosphere to some degree?
It's really talking about surface waters.
Okay. So does the subterranean water flows make any impact on it then at all?
They do, as far as the categorization and that sort of thing. It can, but as far as isolation, not really. I mean, it has to be physically connected somehow.
Okay, because I don't see anything talking about categorization on the definition.
That's the analysis when we ask for a wetland report. The wetland is scored on certain criteria, and I'm not an expert on wetlands either. That's why we have a consultant, but the biologists, they go out there, they look for certain markers and they score it. And depending on the category and the score of that tells you, you know, how significant that wetland is or the buffer associated with it.
Right, and the one I'm looking at looks like there's 3 classes with subclass A and B in all 3 classes.
That could be. Ours is based on the states. There's category 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then there's scores internally to each one of those categories.
Okay.
And let me figure out what page this is on. If I could get everything to work here. Uh, 229 actually is what page it's on. Can I share my screen or?
Yeah, you're good to share.
Okay. Let me remember how to do that because.
Beck, do you want to ask
Seems
the
too
question
long.
now or you want to wait?
I can just ask real quick. I want to make sure the tribes have reviewed this or are invited to our public hearing.
We can certainly do that, and we would still need to issue a SEPA determination, so they will definitely be
Yeah,
notified.
don't want to lose them.
So this is a synthesis of science. This is that DOE document I was talking about. On page 229 of this document, you'll see this highlighted area, and I'll zoom in here. And you'll notice that the language in our definition is essentially what's highlighted here.
That seems impressively precise to me. just throwing that out there.
And so you can see it from this document as well as our definition. To get back to your question, Dave, about what makes it isolated, you'll see that it says they do not have surface outlet by which water leaves the wetland, even seasonally, to another water body.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Are you good with that? Can I stop sharing?
I'm fine, yeah.
Thanks, Jim. Does anybody have any more questions? So you said this will be on June 7th for a public hearing?
That's what we would like.
Okay. So I don't see anything else on our agenda for tonight. So I guess our meeting is adjourned, but I do have one quick question, and it's not an important question. I've just wondered what are they building across from the post office? It's like next to the Windermere building.
Oh, that is, yeah, it used to be just a couple a parking lot there.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so years and years ago, in, I want to say 2008 or 9, Norm Olson's office came in with a short plat to divide that parcel into 2, and as part of that, they built the parking lot. They divided it, and then it sat there for years and years. And now they've come in just to develop a general building. What those specific uses are, we don't know exactly who the tenants are going to be. Although I think it's zoned commercial mixed use. So obviously any use that goes into those buildings would have to be consistent with the commercial mixed use designation.
It looks nice. And as well as the new coffee stand, that looks really nice. They did a great job. So
Good.
anyway, that was all I had. So anybody else have anything before we go? All right, this meeting for the Planning Commission meeting for May 3rd, 2022 is adjourned.